Smoke still curled up from the ravaged towns. Charred houses stood as blackened wooden skeletons, silent amid the rubble. No one needed to say it aloud, but those pillars of smoke spoke clearly. War hadn't yet loosened its grip on Germany, on Europe, or on the world. We girls, barely out of our teens, were herded into a long, weary line. Our steps dragged, exhausted beyond measure. Faces smudged with grime, dirt caking our skin in patches. Eyes sunken, lips cracked and parched, hair tangled, matted with mud and sweat, shoes split at the seams, clothes torn, hands and feet scratched and bruised, purpled in places. After weeks of fleeing, a thick layer of dust coated us, weighing down both body and soul. Just weeks earlier, amidst the chaos of roundups, we'd slept in ditches, huddled in dark cellars, crawling through mud and ash. In a fleeting moment, I thought of the propaganda posters plastered across Berlin's streets, images of strong German women, pristine in crisp military uniforms, faces proud as carved stone. Compared to what we were now, hair a mess, clothes in tatters, eyes dulled by hunger, the contrast stung like a cruel mockery. Some of us kept our heads down, avoiding each other's gaze, as if a single glance could unearth the shame of being exiled prisoners. Later, I learned that over 400,000 German prisoners were shipped to America, held in hundreds of camps scattered across that vast country. We young women were just a tiny fraction of that staggering number. The wind swept in from the harbour, carrying the sharp sting of salt mixed with the acrid reek of bomb smoke. In the distance, a ship loaded with American prisoners of war sat docked, its stars and stripes flapping in the breeze. But we had no clue where we were headed. An American officer barked orders, assigning numbers to each of us: 0216, 0217, 0218. I got 0219. They marched us onto trucks, packed in tight with nearly 200 other prisoners, destination unknown, distance unclear. The engine's roar and the crunch of tires on gravel hit like blows to the chest, each moment heavier than the dragging steps of our evacuation days. Hunger, thirst, and bone-deep exhaustion weren't enough to shake us. Not like the images burned into our minds from lectures and pamphlets, Americans weren't human, they were ruthless. Their camps were places where prisoners' bodies and dignity were ground to dust. In the swaying darkness of the truck bed, a few girls whispered, their voices trembling like wind whistling through a broken window. "Get ready, they're definitely going to torture us." Liesel, a slight girl from Hamburg, huddled beside me. Her face still held a trace of childish softness, cheeks hollowed by hunger, but her wide eyes, red and teary, stood out. She stared at the steel door of the truck, as if trying to guess what waited beyond. Suddenly, her voice broke, quivering. "Are we all going to die?" Before the words fully left her, she burst into sobs. At first, it was just choked gasps, then full-on crying she couldn't hold back. Her small shoulders shook violently, her hands clutching the torn hem of my shirt like a scared child grasping for safety. In that moment, she wasn't the soldier propaganda had glorified, just a young girl, barely grown, thrown into a nightmare too big to bear. I sat silent, my hands gripping a tattered cloth bag, its worn fabric the last shred of a past life. My lips moved silently, repeating a prayer, pleading for survival while bracing for the worst. Outside, through the truck's narrow gaps, I caught glimpses of green fields and, far off, the sea glinting under the afternoon sun, seemingly untouched by war. But inside me, everything was a thick, dark fog of fear and doubt. We didn't know where they were taking us, some camp in the American South, maybe Georgia, Louisiana, or even as far as New York. It was all a vast, murky unknown. The journey across the Atlantic, in the minds of the German soldiers, was supposed to be a grueling ordeal. Turbulent seas, waves crashing wildly, winds howling through the ship's rigging, and every night a battle against relentless seasickness. Yet reality painted a different picture. The Liberty ship glided smoothly over the deep blue waters, its engines humming steadily like a strong, unshaken heartbeat, untouched by any hint of a storm. It took us over a month, sailing from a North African port through the Mediterranean, and across the Atlantic to reach America. On the deck, surrounded by the scent of engine oil and salty sea air, I began to see things that, without this journey, I might never have noticed. The sheer industrial might of America, formidable and unmatched, a world apart from the Germany we'd once held in such high esteem. As the ship docked at Norfolk, Virginia, electric lights blazed through windows, their glow dancing on the shimmering water. The port city buzzed with colossal ships, mechanical cranes rising and falling in rhythm, and streets alive with the hum of civilian cars, a scene that felt like stepping into an entirely different world from the one we'd imagined. One German soldier, hands trembling, pulled out a pen and scribbled in his journal. "It's unbelievable. Everything here is bigger, faster, cleaner. We were taught America was weak, starving. But now, the lights, the machinery, the vibrant life before my eyes, it's overwhelming. Germany might be half a century." Stepping off the truck, the air felt like it was squeezing my chest tight. The hard ground beneath my feet seemed to pulse with my racing heartbeat. Before me stretched the American camp, low barbed wire fences, tidy rows of wooden barracks, and a tall flagpole with the stars and stripes snapping in the wind. I wanted to lift my head, to scan for signs of the horrors we'd been warned about for years. But before I could take it all in, a sharp shout from an American soldier cut through the air. We flinched, shrinking back, hearts plummeting. Each step forward felt like plunging into an abyss, with one question echoing in my mind: is this the start of the terrors we've been told about? We huddled together, hands gripping each other, braced for the first blow. But what happened next wasn't anything like the nightmares drilled into us for years. An American soldier approached, raising his hand in a gesture. His voice rang out, firm but not cruel. We couldn't catch every word, but his meaning was clear. "Line up." That was it. No yelling, no rifle butts jabbing our backs. Then another soldier walked down the line, handing each of us a metal canteen filled with clear, cool water. I stared at the liquid glinting in the sunlight, my throat tightening. One girl, trembling, raised it to her lips, gulping as if afraid it'd be snatched away. No whips cracked, no shouts rang out, just the crunch of boots on gravel and their calm, watchful eyes. They checked our papers, scribbled notes, and motioned for us to move on. We glanced at each other, eyes wide, hardly believing what was happening. We were led, one by one, into a washroom. In my hands was a bar of white soap, heavy, with a faint, gentle scent. A soft towel and a set of clean clothes, neatly folded, sat nearby. When my fingertips brushed the soap, its floral hint hit me like a wave, leaving my whole body reeling. I'd braced for humiliation, for blows or harsh shouts. But instead, this felt like care. Warm water poured from the shower, washing away layers of dirt, sweat, and the lingering stench of smoke clinging to my skin. Some girls broke into sobs, tears blending with the water streaming down their faces. Others let out soft, hesitant laughs, caught between disbelief and awkwardness. I glanced at the fogged-up mirror, watching my tangled hair loosen, my ashen skin slowly regain its flush. This feeling, it was like being handed back my humanity. Liesel stood beside me, her voice catching as she whispered, "They taught us these people were monsters, that they'd crush us. And now, they're giving us soap." Her words stirred a storm in my chest. Fear still lingered, but it was being edged out by astonishment. Mixed in was something heavier, guilt. Why did I feel relief? Why did I feel grateful? We were still enemies, weren't we? Each drop of water didn't just rinse away grime, it chipped at the rigid beliefs, the Reich's relentless teachings. It was hard to name the feeling. Fear, wonder, gratitude, all tangled together. In the harsh white light of the washroom, a thought struck me, maybe the enemy was human too. Stepping out, the scent of soap still clung to my skin. The clean clothes, crisp with the smell of fresh fabric, hugged my body, feeling both foreign and disorienting. There was no turning back, we were prisoners now. Yet, instead of the shame or beatings we'd imagined, Every small detail, from the neatly folded towel to the perfectly aligned buttons, planted a haunting question in my mind. Why are they treating us like this? We were led to the mess hall. Long tables were laden with food, things that, during the war, had only existed in dreams. Golden boiled potatoes, fresh carrots, tender stewed meat that fell apart at the touch, fragrant white bread, and steaming cups of coffee. I brushed my fingers against a piece of bread, my mind taut with suspicion. Beside me, a small girl whispered, trembling, "Is this a trap? Why are they feeding us?" We gathered around the table, eyes fixed on the steaming plates, the aroma filling our chests. A girl from Cologne suddenly laughed as she bit into the bread, a pure, startling laugh, like a child's after months of starvation. I froze, not because of her laugh, but because no shouts followed, no whips cracked, no punishment descended. A chill ran through me. If the enemy could be this kind, were all the things we'd been taught nothing but lies? The lessons, the pamphlets, every word about American monsters, in that moment, they crumbled. My hands shook as I took the tray. Tears welled up, spilling onto the metal, glistening on my calloused, dirt-streaked fingers. I sobbed, unable to hold it back, a mix of joy and shame. Shame for eating well, for being treated decently, while family and friends back home still starved under bombs. The girl beside me trembled too, gently resting her hand on my shoulder. No words were needed. Her eyes said it all. We're not being beaten. We're not being starved. We grew up on lessons branding Americans as monsters, yet here they were, handing us soap, food, and a quiet kind of respect. No insults, no violence. It was their kindness that weighed heavier on my heart than any fear of battle ever could. A sharp question stabbed at me. If the enemy could be this decent, had we been lied to all these years? In that moment, the war wasn't just gunfire or bombs. It was a brutal clash between propaganda and reality. Every touch, every bite of bread, every sip of warm coffee became a reminder. What we'd believed might have been nothing but shadows over our eyes. But alongside the shock came a strange new fear, not of whips or torture, but of this very kindness. The loyalty to the Reich, drilled into us, woven into our blood, now wavered with every piece of bread, every glance free of hate. My heart sank, my mind spun, grasping for something solid to hold on to. I looked around the table. The other girls ate, some giggling softly, others whispering behind their hands that this felt like a dream. One girl let out a trembling sigh. We're not beaten, not humiliated. I stayed silent, but inside, a fierce battle raged. The years of lessons about a cruel enemy versus the reality unfolding before me. Gentle gestures, fragrant bread, steaming coffee. For the first time, I realized I feared this kindness more than any violence I'd ever known. It didn't just challenge my beliefs, it shattered the very foundation of what we'd lived for. I closed my notebook, my hands still shaking. Outside, the steady tread of American soldiers' boots echoed on the path, and from the corner of the room came the soft hum of the other girls' laughter, gentle, unfamiliar. I pulled the clean blanket up to my chest, breathing in the scent of fresh fabric, and felt a lump rise in my throat. This calm didn't bring relief, it was like a mirror, forcing me to stare straight at the beliefs I'd clung to for years. I closed my eyes, letting shame and doubt coil tight in my chest, knowing that from this moment on, my greatest battle wouldn't be out there, it would be within my own soul. And I knew this was just the beginning. The days ahead in the American camp would keep challenging our beliefs about the enemy, about what the Nazis had drilled into us, and most of all, about ourselves. The divide between propaganda, education, and reality would only grow sharper, sparking an inner war no bullets could settle. Each morning, I woke on a sturdy wooden bed, wrapped in clean blankets scented with starch and soap. Looking around, I saw neat rows of bunks, green grass stretching beyond the window, and American soldiers moving without menace, just watching quietly. Only now did I notice my initial fear had started to fade. Breakfast was served on trays, warm bread, eggs, meat, fragrant coffee. Liesel, who'd trembled that first day, now giggled as she bit into her bread, her eyes sparkling as if reclaiming a sliver of lost youth. The tall, sharp-eyed girl from Hamburg, once tight-lipped and tense, now furrowed her brow, then raised it at the sight of her tray, as if she'd never believed in such kindness. Some girls cried not from pain, but from a soothing relief after months of horror. My own tears welled up, but I turned away, not wanting anyone to see my weakness. Beside me, another girl discreetly wiped her eyes, whispering to the one next to her, They're not hurting us." Her voice quivered, but a fragile new trust was creeping in. Maybe life could still hold some fairness, however small. I stole glances at the American soldiers. They didn't snarl or threaten. They just handed out trays, gently correcting anyone who strayed from the line. A strange feeling stirred in me. If the enemy could be this kind, were all our lessons lies? My loyalty to the Reich crashed against the wall of truth. We'd been taught Americans were monsters, but now they seemed merely human. And I, once trembling with fear, felt a strange new strength. I no longer feared violence or humiliation. Instead, I was bewildered by kindness. Every bite of bread, every sip of water, every gentle glance from the soldiers reminded me. The world had changed, and we had to learn to see it differently too. That afternoon, as we finished washing clothes, the rumble of truck engines echoed from the camp's gate. We all turned to look. A new group of women prisoners was arriving. They stepped down from the trucks, their movements shaky, eyes darting like ours had just days ago. Their hair was matted in clumps, faces gaunt, hands clutching tattered cloth bags, the last remnants of their old lives. One girl, barely 19, sobbed loudly when she saw the watchtower and the armed American soldiers nearby. Fear was etched across their faces, and it hit me. They were a mirror of us when we first arrived. The girl from Bremen beside me whispered, "Look at them. Isn't that us a few days ago?" When the new prisoners were handed their first meal, many hesitated, eyes wide with suspicion, as if lifting a spoon to their lips would bring a lash. A girl from our group, usually cold and quiet, stood up, gently sliding a tray of bread toward them, murmuring, "Go ahead, it's okay." Watching that, my throat tightened. We'd once believed we'd be starved, beaten, broken. Yet here we were, reassuring others, telling them there'd be no whips, no torment in this place. Some of the new girls sat frozen, eyes brimming with tears, unable to trust. But as they saw the Americans quietly handing out trays and watched us eat without fear, the tension in their faces began to crack. Some broke down right at the table, tears mixing with the bread in their hands. I wondered silently, was this the cruelest truth of all? That we'd been raised on lies, and now kindness cut deeper than any lash ever could. During the meal, a girl from yesterday's group of new prisoners suddenly collapsed onto the table. Her face was pale, sweat streaming down. We gasped, some letting out soft cries. In that moment, my heart clenched, the old fear surged back. This is it. They'll let her die. But no. A nearby American soldier rushed over. He motioned for us to step back and called loudly for a medic. I saw urgency in every move. A water bottle was brought, a clean cloth soaked and placed on her forehead, and a doctor in a white coat arrived minutes later. The girl, trembling, whimpered in German, "Please, don't." But the soldier just shook his head, his English thick but clear enough for me to catch. "It's okay. You're safe. Just breathe." A hush fell over the room. The rest of us exchanged glances, unsure how to react. Everything we'd been taught screamed that American soldiers would trample prisoners like weeds. Yet here they were, kneeling, tending to a frail German girl as tears rolled down her cheeks. When she was gently led to rest in the camp's small infirmary, one of the soldiers glanced at us and gave a slight nod, no smile, no arrogance. Just a brief gesture, but I felt its meaning. You're not enemies anymore, you're just people who need to live. I sat frozen, my heart a tangle of emotions. I realized the thing I feared most wasn't torture, it was this kindness. Because it laid bare the truth. For years, we'd been fed lies. And now, every simple act from these soldiers was unraveling the beliefs I'd once held so tightly. That night, in the barracks, a dim yellow light spilled over the rows of beds. The hum of insects from the fields outside mingled with the steady breathing of those too exhausted to stay awake. But in the corner, several pairs of eyes remained open, staring into the dark. "How's she doing?" A whisper cut through the quiet. I heard the Americans took her to the infirmary, gave her a bed, even medicine. Another girl answered, her voice tinged with disbelief. A soft giggle followed, faint but jarring in the heavy air. Medicine? For prisoners? Back in Germany, even our own people couldn't get enough. I lay still, listening as whispers passed from bed to bed. The girl from Bremen, once so timid, spoke softly. "Did you notice? They're not beating us, they're saving us." A long silence followed. Then the Hamburg girl, always so tough, spoke, her voice low and rough but firm. "Maybe everything they taught us was a lie." My heart tightened at her words. I didn't dare speak, but deep down, part of me agreed. For years, we'd been told Americans were monsters. Yet here, every clean bed, every hot meal, every gesture to help a fainting girl, it all tore that narrative apart. In the darkness, I pulled the blanket to my chin, tears falling again. Not from fear this time, but because my world had been turned upside down. I felt relief, shame, and gratitude all at once, and I knew those same tears were streaking down the faces of other girls in that shadowed room. I set down my pen, closing the thin diary. The last page still carried the scent of ink, trembling with my uneven scrawl. In the fading evening light, I slipped the notebook under my pillow, as if afraid someone might read the words that had shaken my very beliefs. Decades later, those fragile pages offered a raw glimpse into the lives of German women prisoners in American camps. Gone were the propaganda-fueled images of monsters. Instead, they told a story of young women, tormented by fear, then bewildered by unexpected kindness. Years after those trembling diary entries, people could finally piece together what those early days were like for German women in US POW camps. These weren't the blood-soaked dungeons they dreaded, filled with darkness and whips. In truth, the young women, mostly 18 or 20, former secretaries, nurses, or radio operators, stepped into a world that defied their expectations. Clean showers, neatly folded clothes, hot meals, and strict but humiliation-free discipline. Historian Kramer's research reveals that American POW camps adhered to the Geneva Conventions, ensuring prisoners received food, medical care, and living conditions on par with US soldiers. This reality stood in stark contrast to the grim tales the women had been fed. After arriving, their daily lives settled into an almost surprising order. The barracks were tidy, pathways swept clean, grass along the walkways vibrant green, and watchtowers positioned evenly but without menace. Each morning, a bell rang promptly, and the women gathered for meals, assigned tasks like kitchen duty, laundry, or gardening, or simply tended to camp upkeep. Food came regularly: warm bread, stewed meat, fresh vegetables. Gone were the desperate days in Germany, scraping by on hunger and sharing crumbling scraps. Clothes were issued clean, laundered often. They grew accustomed to moments of privacy, allowed to keep diaries, chat, or join occasional entertainment like films or music organized by the camp. Yet, despite the material comforts, some women remained wary. They studied the American soldiers, their movements, their conversations, their enforcement of camp rules. There was no brutality or degradation, as propaganda had warned, but control was ever present. Strict regulations, monitored head counts, numbered tags around their necks, it all created a sense of limited freedom, both safe and confining. Day by day, the girls' bodies began to change. Hair grew glossier, skin regained its glow, and strength slowly returned, fueled by steady meals and proper sleep. The camp's medical staff conducted regular health checks, swiftly addressing any signs of illness or parasites. Life in the camp felt both routine and jarring, highlighting the stark contrast between the chaos of war back home and the order of this American outpost. To an outsider, the camp wasn't a place of cruelty but a tightly run system, balancing security with the basic needs of its prisoners. The women, who had braced for humiliation and brutality, found themselves adjusting to a reality they'd never imagined. One where kindness, nourishment, and structure posed the greatest challenge to their inner beliefs. In the months that followed, life in the American camp settled into a familiar rhythm. The German women prisoners, once trembling with fear, began to reclaim their strength and sense of self. Clean clothes, hot meals, medicine, and order, it all stood in sharp opposition to the propaganda they'd been fed. U.S. military reports noted that, at first, the women prisoners often refused to engage, their eyes sharp with suspicion, sometimes flinching at the slightest move from a guard. But over time, they adapted. They smiled more, talked more, and some even joined in singing or reading during recreation hours. Notably, American officers observed a peculiar psychological effect. Kindness often unsettled the prisoners more than harshness would have. For many German girls, being treated fairly and humanely wasn't just surprising. It forced them to confront the truth that they'd been deceived. The notion of Americans as monsters crumbled not amid gunfire, but in the simplest moments: a full meal, a clean bed, a pill handed to them with care. From a broader perspective, this treatment created a profound crack in the prisoners' psyche. They carried loyalty to a defeated Germany, yet couldn't deny the reality that their enemy could be kind. Post-war studies later suggested that these experiences in American POW camps planted seeds for reconciliation, showing that war wasn't just blood and fire, but could be resolved through humanity and order.